You ever get to the end of a packed day, look at your completely crossed off to-do list and realize you don't actually remember living any of it?
Oh, yeah, like constantly.
Subscribe!
I mean, you drove to work, you sent the emails, you ate lunch, but if someone asked you what the air felt like when you walked outside or what your food actually tasted like, you draw a complete blank. It's like you're sleepwalking through your own life.
Yeah, and it's a condition so common today that we just, we accept it as totally normal. We are physically present, but mentally, we're just miles away.
Exactly.
We're usually projecting ourselves into some imagined future or like endlessly replaying something from the past.
And that is exactly what we are tackling in today's deep dive. We're looking at how to wake up, how to become a more present, effective, and, clear-headed human being.
Which is something I think everyone could use right now.
For sure. And our guide for this is the work of clinical psychologist and martial artist Richard W. Sears. And let's get our mission straight right out of the gate. Here we are, stripping away all the mystical baggage you might associate with this topic.
Yeah, none of the typical cliches.
Right. We are tossing out the rainbows and butterflies stuff.
We are focusing entirely on the mechanics. I mean, the hard neuroscience, the practical psychology, and the tangible steps to actually rewire how your brain interacts with reality.
Plus, we have some incredible real-world stories to ground all of this. I mean, involving ninja training, psychiatric wards, and a very surprising run-in with the Beastie Boys.
Yeah, that last one is wild.
It really is.
Yeah.
So let's just jump right into the core trap we all fall into, the automatic pilot.
Yeah, so to understand the automatic pilot, we first have to look at how we've been conditioned to view time. The philosopher Alan Watts called it a trick that's played on all of us from the moment we are born.
A trick, like by society.
Basically, yeah. Think about when you're a kid. You're constantly told, won't it be great when you get to kindergarten?
Oh, right. And then you get there and it's just wait until high school.
Exactly. Then college. Then you get your first job and you're immediately looking forward to the promotion, then buying the house, then the holy grail of retirement.
It's just a perpetual carrot on a stick. You're always living for the next milestone.
Right. We are systematically hypnotized into anticipating the future. And the tragedy is that you eventually hit retirement. You're exhausted from decades of stress, and you look back and realize you were absent for most of the journey.
Man, that is bleak.
It is. You miss the actual living part because your brain was permanently stationed like 5 years ahead of your body.
And the irony is that we possess more time-saving technology than any generation in human history.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we have microwaves that cook a meal in 2 minutes. We have smartphones that let us instantly communicate across the globe.
Yeah, but if you ask anyone today, they feel like they have significantly less time than our ancestors who had to, wash all their clothes by hand in a river and cook every meal from scratch.
It makes no sense on paper.
Well, the technology saves us physical time, sure, but we immediately fill that mental space by cramming our minds with the next thing on our endless mental itinerary. We operate entirely on automatic pilot.
Right.
And Richard Sears, the clinical psychologist we're referencing today, he has this incredibly relatable story about this.
Oh, the driveway one.
Yes. So he was driving home one day, deeply engrossed in a fascinating conversation with a friend who was sitting right there in the passenger seat.
Okay.
He navigates the traffic perfectly, pulls flawlessly into his own driveway, puts the car in park, and then realizes he was supposed to be driving his friend back to their house.
Wait, so he just drove to his own house out of habit?
Exactly. His brain was so disconnected from his actions that his body just executed the drive home program entirely on its own.
That is hilarious. And honestly, I've done things like that. It's harmless enough in that situation.
Right. Usually it is. But Sears also shares a story where this autopilot mechanism turns destructive.
Okay, lay it on me.
He was walking through his office, past a coworker, and just threw out a casual, hey, good job on that project yesterday.
Seems totally normal.
Right. But the coworker stops, glares at him, gets visibly furious, and aggressively demands to know what he meant by that.
Over a compliment.
Yeah. Sears was completely baffled. He had just given the guy a nice compliment. But then he remembered the context this coworker was going through, a highly toxic, bitter divorce.
Oh, no.
And his ex-wife communicated almost entirely through sarcasm and passive aggression. So the coworker's brain was running a defensive autopilot program.
Ah, I see where this is going.
His ears heard a compliment, but his conditioned automatic emotional software instantly translated it as a sarcastic attack.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, though. Isn't autopilot actually a highly evolved, necessary thing?
How do you mean?
Well, like if I'm driving down the highway at 60 miles an hour and a deer jumps out in front of my car, I don't want to be, mindfully analyzing the texture of the brake pedal or contemplating the majesty of the deer.
Right, no, you definitely don't.
I want my muscle memory to bypass my conscious thought entirely and just slam on the brakes. Like, autopilot saves lives in those moments.
And you are totally right. The physical autopilot, those ingrained reflexes, is an incredible survival mechanism. If we had to consciously process how to tie our shoes or balance on a bicycle or steer a car every single time, our brains would just fry.
Right, it would be way too much data.
The danger arises when we rely on autopilot for our emotional and interpersonal lives.
Oh.
Letting your emotional reflexes run the show is how you end up like that coworker, reacting with hostility to a genuine compliment. It's how we ruin relationships, jump to catastrophic conclusions, or just numb out to our daily existence.
So if emotional autopilot is the disease, mindfulness is the cure. But, that word has been so commodified. Let's look at what it actually means mechanically.
Yeah, a great functional definition comes from John Kabat-Zinn. He defines it as, and I'll just quote it here, the awareness that emerges through paying attention, on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally, to the unfolding of experience from moment to moment.
See, paying attention sounds simple, but cognitive psychology shows us that attention is actually incredibly complex. It's not just a single spotlight you turn on or off.
No, not at all.
Like clinical models, like the one developed by Solberg and Mateer, break human attention down into 5 distinct gears, and real mindfulness forces you to engage all of them.
Yeah, let's use your driving analogy to map those out, because it really helps visualize it. First, you have focused attention that's you staring directly at the brake lights of the semi-truck in front of you.
But I can't just focus for 2 seconds. I need sustained attention to keep locking on to those brake lights for a boring 2-hour stretch of highway without completely zoning out.
Exactly. And while you're sustaining that focus, you also need selective attention. You have to actively filter out the radio playing in the background or your kids yelling in the back seat.
Right, you're actively choosing what to ignore.
Then alternating attention kicks in. You need to briefly check your rearview mirror, look at your speedometer, and then immediately snap your focus back to the road ahead.
Right, so I'm shifting between tasks.
And finally, divided attention.
Yeah.
You are physically steering the wheel, feeling the resistance of the pedals under your feet, and scanning the traffic flow all at the exact same time.
It's a lot of mental work.
It is. When you are truly mindful, you aren't emptying your head into some blank void. You are intensely, actively firing all 5 of those cognitive cylinders to anchor yourself to the present reality.
But there is a second crucial half to this equation, acceptance. You have to pay attention non-judgmentally.
Yes, that is so important.
And I think acceptance is probably the most misunderstood concept in psychology.
Oh, absolutely.
People assume acceptance means resignation. Like they think if you accept a terrible job, it means you're giving up and deciding you deserve a terrible job.
It doesn't mean approval at all. The philosopher Alan Watts had a great old joke about this.
Well, let's hear it.
So, a traveler is lost deep in the English countryside. He finds a local farmer and asks for directions to a nearby town. The farmer scratches his head, looks at the map, and says, "Well, sir, I do know the way, but if I were you, I wouldn't start from here."
That's amazing. Which is absurd, but it's exactly what we do psychologically.
It is.
We want to fix our crushing anxiety, but we refuse to acknowledge how anxious we are. We want to heal a broken relationship, but we refuse to admit how toxic it has actually become.
We are desperate to reach a destination, but we refuse to start from right here.
Exactly.
Acceptance is simply acknowledging the undeniable reality of the present moment, so you stop wasting massive amounts of energy fighting the fact that it exists.
And to see what radical acceptance looks like in a physical sense, Sears has a fascinating story from his martial arts background, right?
Oh, the ninja training, yes. So he was training under a ninja teacher named Robert Johnson. And Johnson had a highly unorthodox, basically brutal training method.
Oh.
Once Sears proved he was a dedicated student, Johnson just started randomly hitting him.
Wait, like outside of the training mat?
Everywhere. They could be standing in the hallway having a casual conversation about the weather, and Johnson would suddenly deliver a full-speed strike to Sears' stomach.
No way. No warning.
No warning, no protective gear. Naturally, Sears' brain went into hypervigilance. He tried to be constantly on guard, anticipating the next attack.
Which sounds exhausting.
Beyond exhausting. But staying in that state of constant anticipation made his muscles incredibly rigid. So when the strike inevitably came, His tense body absorbed the full shock, and it hurt terribly.
It's the psychological equivalent of walking on eggshells.
Exactly. But eventually, Sears realizes it is biologically impossible to be on high alert 24 hours a day. He can't fight the reality of the situation. So he finally just accepts it. He tells himself, I am going to get hit, and there's absolutely nothing I can do to prevent it.
And what happened?
That psychological surrender changed his physical reality. By accepting the inevitable, he stopped bracing for impact. His muscles finally relaxed. And because his body was loose and fluid when the next stomp kick landed, he naturally absorbed the blow and rolled with it.
Wow.
He barely felt it. It was his own resistance, his own rigid anticipation that was causing the vast majority of the pain.
You know, it's like trying to brace yourself for a turbulent flight.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Imagine you're thousands of feet in the air, the plane starts rattling, and you grip your armrests until your knuckles turn white, locking every muscle in your arms and shoulders.
We've all been there.
But gripping the armrests doesn't stop the plane from shaking. The plane is going to shake regardless. Your resistance just ensures that you get off the flight exhausted and sore.
Right.
Acceptance is simply letting go of the armrest so you can ride the bumps.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The question then becomes, how do we let go of the armrests in our daily lives?
Exactly.
Mindfulness practice focuses on teasing apart our internal experience, which usually feels like one big tangled knot of distress. We learn to separate body sensations, feelings, thoughts, and the nature of reality.
The tangle between physical sensations and our thoughts is where we really get into trouble, because our brains are constantly tricking us into mislabeling what is actually happening inside our own bodies.
They really are.
Think about the last time you went on a really nerve-wracking first date or stood up to give a public speech. Your heart is pounding, your palms are sweating. How do you know what emotion that actually is?
Well, psychologists have proven this disconnect with some wildly creative experiments. Take the famous shaky bridge study.
Oh, I love this one.
It's classic. Researchers had an attractive female interviewer approach men in 2 different locations. One was on a solid, safe, low wooden bridge. The other was on a terrifying, high-altitude swaying suspension bridge.
Sounds like a nightmare.
Right. Well, the men interviewed on the terrifying bridge were vastly more likely to find the researcher attractive and try to contact her later.
Because their hearts were pounding out of their chests from the sheer physical terror of the bridge, but their brains looked around, saw an attractive woman, and mislabeled the physical arousal of fear as sexual attraction.
Precisely. They ran another classic experiment where they gave subjects an adrenaline shot, telling them it was just a simple vitamin injection.
Okay.
The subjects were then placed in a waiting room with an actor. If the actor started throwing papers and acting furiously angry, the subjects began to feel angry.
Just copying the vibe.
Essentially, yeah. Their hearts were racing from the adrenaline, their brains searched the room for context, saw the angry guy, and concluded, well, I must be furious too.
But the kicker is what happened when the researchers actually told the subjects the truth, right? If they told them, hey, this shot will make your heart race and your palms sweat. The subjects watched the angry actor and felt absolutely nothing. They correctly attributed their physical sensations to the drug, not to an emotion.
This is why learning to observe your thoughts without immediately believing them is so critical. Thoughts are not facts.
That's a huge point.
They are just mental events. Mindfulness uses the metaphor of a waterfall. Most of us spend our lives standing directly under the crushing weight of the waterfall, getting battered by the water, believing every single anxious thought or angry impulse is an absolute reality we have to react to.
And taking a mindful step back is like stepping behind the waterfall.
Exactly.
There's a little cave back there. You can still see the water rushing past. You can still hear the roar of the thoughts. But they aren't pummeling you anymore. You are observing the cascade rather than drowning in it.
And learning to observe your discomfort without trying to escape it is how you break deep psychological phobias.
Because our instinct is always to run.
Right. When we feel something unpleasant, our immediate instinct is avoidance. Let's say a bird suddenly crashes into a window right next to you. It's startling. Your heart rate spikes. You feel anxious. So you step away from the window and your anxiety naturally drops.
Which feels like a win. You solved the problem.
You solved it in the short term. But neurologically, your brain just learned a new rule. Moving away from windows cures anxiety.
Oh, wow.
So the next time you are near a window, your brain generates anxiety to prompt you to move away. The more you avoid the window, the more dangerous the window becomes in your mind.
It snowballs.
It really does. Soon, you are avoiding all windows. Then you can't drive because of the windshield. Your entire life shrinks because every time you run from the feeling, you validate the fear. You literally make the monster bigger by running from it.
So the only way to shrink the monster is to stand your ground. This is the mechanism behind exposure therapy, which is deeply rooted in mindfulness principles. If you just stand next to the window, your brain will scream at you. It will tell you that the anxiety is going to rise infinitely until your heart literally explodes.
But physiologically, that is impossible. An anxiety spike has a ceiling. If you just stand by the window, breathe, and simply observe the feeling of terror without running, the anxiety will eventually peak, level off, and naturally decrease.
It's exactly like jumping into a freezing cold swimming pool.
Oh, great example.
If you dip your toe in and immediately yank it out because it's uncomfortable, you will spend your whole life believing that pool is an icy torture chamber. But if you jump in, yes, it is a massive shock to your system. You want to scramble out immediately.
Of course.
But if you just tread water and wait out that initial spike of physical panic, your body naturally acclimates. Within 3 minutes, the water feels perfectly fine.
Mindfulness is the practice of jumping into the freezing pool of your own difficult emotions and simply treading water until your nervous system acclimates.
Here's where it gets really interesting, especially for anyone who is skeptical of the purely psychological side. We aren't just talking about changing your attitude or your coping strategies. We're talking about fundamentally changing your physical hardware.
The neurobiology is undeniable at this point. Dr. Sarah Lazar at Harvard conducted MRI studies demonstrating that just 8 weeks of daily mindfulness practice physically thickens the brain.
Wait, physically thickens it?
Yes. Specifically, she found increased density in the middle prefrontal cortex.
Let's break down how thinking can actually build physical tissue, because it sounds like magic, but it's actually basic neuroplasticity.
It comes down to a fundamental rule in neuroscience. Neurons that fire together wire together. Every time your mind wanders off onto autopilot and you consciously catch it, stop, and bring your attention back to the present moment, you are firing a specific neural pathway.
It's literally a bicep curl for your brain.
It is a mental rep. You are forcing blood flow and metabolic activity to the middle prefrontal cortex. Over thousands of these tiny reps, the brain responds by building denser, more robust neural connections in that specific area, literally thickening the tissue, just like a muscle adapting to lifting weights.
And what does a thicker middle prefrontal cortex actually buy you?
A lot. Dr. Dan Siegel identified 9 specific functions governed by this area of the brain, and upgrading them changes your entire life. Fear modulation is a huge one.
How does that work?
When that area is physically denser, the neural pathways that soothe your amygdala, your brain's panic center, are stronger. You still feel fear, but you recover from it much faster.
It also drastically improves response flexibility, right?
Yes, exactly.
That is the tiny gap in time between an external trigger and your reaction to it. If someone cuts you off in traffic, a thicker prefrontal cortex gives you the processing power to pause for a fraction of a second before you lay on the horn and scream. You get to choose your response, rather than being a victim of your reflex.
This neurological shift changes how we approach therapy entirely. Look at the difference between traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, which is heavily based on mindfulness.
Okay, let's compare them.
In CBT, you are essentially trying to outthink your own thoughts. If your brain says, I am a failure, CBT trains you to argue with that thought, to find evidence of your past successes to prove the thought wrong.
Which can be helpful, but you are still arguing with yourself. You are fighting on the same level as the problem.
Right. Psychologists call this a first-order change. You are just trying harder and harder to do the same thing.
Right.
There is a brilliant metaphor for this. Imagine a bird trapped in a glass vestibule. The bird sees the trees outside, so it flies upward, repeatedly smashing its beak against the glass ceiling. It thinks, I just need to fly harder. It batters itself, getting more and more exhausted.
That is what it feels like to constantly argue with your own anxiety.
But eventually the bird gets so exhausted that it gives up. It falls down to the floor of the vestibule, stops fighting, looks around, and suddenly realizes the actual doorway is wide open right behind it.
That is a second-order change. You stop playing the unwinnable game entirely. You change your relationship to the environment.
Exactly. In ACT, they use a chessboard metaphor. Usually, we identify with the chess pieces. We think we are the white pieces, the good thoughts fighting a desperate war against the black pieces, the bad thoughts.
And mindfulness teaches you to stop being the pieces and instead Realize that you are the board itself.
Yes.
The board doesn't fight the pieces. The board doesn't care who is winning. It just holds all of them equally.
That's a great way to put it.
So with all this complex neuroscience and psychology, let's do some rapid-fire myth busting, because it is very easy to approach this the wrong way. First off, mindfulness is not a forced state of hyper-awareness.
Trying to force it is disastrous. Richard Sears shares a hilarious, albeit painful story from when he was a teenager, trying to force himself to be a hyper-vigilant ninja.
Oh boy.
He thought if he made his environment dangerous, his brain would have to stay perfectly mindful. So he scattered caltrops, those sharp, multi-pointed metal spikes used to puncture tires, along with open pocket knives all over his bedroom floor.
Wait, on his floor? Like where he walks? That is a disaster waiting to happen.
Completely. He walked into his room barefoot one day, entirely lost in thought, stepped squarely on a metal spike, recoiled in pain, scraped his leg on a knife, lost his balance, crashed into a full-length mirror, shattered it, and ended up bleeding all over his carpet.
Oh my gosh.
The lesson is simple. You cannot force a natural process through sheer willpower or artificial intensity. You just end up causing more damage.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's also not a religion, and it's not a morality test. It's not mindfulness with a capital M.
Right.
Sears tells a story about his time leading therapy groups in a locked psychiatric unit. A patient named Dora came to group with her arm heavily bandaged. She had ripped a metal pipe out of a sink and used it to smash a reinforced security window, slicing her arm open in the process, just so she could stick her arm outside and try to signal someone for a cigarette.
If you approach that with a moralistic, judgmental framework, you ask, why did you do that? Don't you know that's bad?
Exactly.
But Sears, using a mindful approach, bypassed judgment entirely. He simply looked at her and asked, how is that working for you?
Just completely objective.
It was an invitation to look objectively at cause and effect. Her desire for a cigarette led her to mutilate her own arm and get placed on a 24-hour watch in an empty room with nothing but a mattress. Mindfulness just asks you to clearly observe the reality of your choices without the blinding filter of shame or judgment.
And speaking of blinding filters, the final myth is that mindfulness makes you perfect. Our ingrained ideas can literally blind us to the present moment, no matter how much you practice.
Yeah, we are all human.
The best story in this entire discussion is when Sears was actually hired to provide security for the Dalai Lama during a visit to Chicago.
This is the perfect illustration of how our thoughts distort reality. So Sears is on high alert, scanning the massive crowd for threats. He notices a guy who has somehow slipped past the police barricades. The guy is wearing a faded ratty hoodie and looks completely out of place.
Okay.
Sears' brain immediately categorizes him using a shortcut. This is a homeless guy. He locks onto this judgment, viewing the man as a potential nuisance or threat.
But then the event coordinator comes over and warmly hugs the guy. A few minutes later, the Dalai Lama himself walks over and gives this guy a huge embrace.
But Sears is so locked into his internal narrative, this is a homeless guy, that his brain literally cannot process the contradictory reality happening right in front of his eyes.
He can't update his mental model.
No. Later, when they are trying to load the Dalai Lama into the secure police motorcade, this same guy in the hoodie tries to climb into the car.
And what does Sears do?
Well, doing what he thinks is his job, he firmly, physically blocks him, kicks him out, tells him to go find his own ride, and slams the door in his face.
Wow.
It isn't until the following day that Sears asks another security guard who that guy actually was. And he finds out he just physically ejected Adam Yell, also known as MCA, from the Beastie Boys.
No way.
Yes. He was a massive supporter who had just helped raise millions of dollars for the Free Tibet cause.
He kicked a Beastie Boy out of the Dalai Lama's car.
That is just incredible. It's such a brilliant, humbling reminder that our rigid thoughts and snap judgments literally prevent us from seeing the reality standing right in front of us.
It proves that the human brain will always look for shortcuts. The practice of mindfulness isn't about perfectly eliminating those shortcuts. It's about catching yourself, making them faster and faster, and returning your attention to the actual reality of the moment.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway for you, the listener. You don't need to retreat to a mountain monastery or, get stomped by a ninja to rewire your brain.
Definitely not. It is entirely about your daily, mundane moments. It's about taking something as automatic as brushing your teeth and actually experiencing it. Feeling the physical weight of the brush handle, noticing the specific temperature of the water, hearing the sound of the bristles.
It is about waking up from the sleepwalking state. Instead of constantly anticipating the future, you bring your attention back to the physical sensations, the feelings, the thoughts, and the undeniable reality of right now.
We want to leave you with one final provocative exercise to get to the bottom of your own autopilot. Take whatever goal you are currently stressing over and ask yourself a recursive question. What do I want?
And you have to keep digging.
Right. If your answer is, I want that promotion, ask yourself again, if I get the promotion, what will that give me? Maybe it gives you financial security. Okay, if you have security, what will that give you? Peace of mind? A feeling of being loved or respected? Keep asking until you hit rock bottom.
And when you finally reach that core human desire, peace, love, freedom, you might just realize that the profound state of being you are perpetually chasing in the future doesn't actually require a promotion or a new house at all.
Exactly. What if that peace is actually available to you right now, hidden quietly behind the waterfall of your own thoughts? Actually, try this tomorrow when you pull into your driveway after work. Don't immediately jump out.
Yeah, try breaking the pattern.
Leave the car running for 30 extra seconds. Just sit there, grip the steering wheel, feel the AC on your face, and ask yourself who was actually driving the car for the last 20 minutes. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.